12-year-old Elijah Ward carried a torn spiral notebook in his backpack for 2 years, filling it with drawings of houses he'd never lived in. A blue one with a porch swing, a yellow one with a treehouse, a plain brick one with just a working front door. Because for 2 years, home for Elijah and his mother Tanya was the back seat of a 2009 Honda Civic, parked in a rotating series of Walmart and church parking lots across 3 counties in Ohio. Nobody at his middle school knew. Nobody on the Family Feud stage knew, not even the producers who'd cast the Ward family for their warmth and easy chemistry on camera. But on taping day, during a routine question about something your family always does together, Elijah answered honestly, without thinking about who was listening. And the specific number he mentioned, 731 nights, made Steve Harvey stop mid-sentence and ask the crew to hold the show. The day began the way every taping day begins. Steve arrived at the Atlanta studio around 9 in the morning, running through his standard pre-show energy, ribbing a producer about a coffee order gone wrong. 2 families waited backstage, the Wards and the Castellanos family from Georgia, a big, easy, laughing group of 5 who'd traveled just an hour to get there. Tanya Ward sat beside Elijah in the green room, both of them dressed in clothes that looked clean and pressed, but slightly worn at the seams. The kind of careful presentation that comes from someone who irons what little they have, because appearances are sometimes the only thing you can still control. Tanya kept glancing at the exits throughout the pre-show briefing, an old habit from months of needing to know where the nearest safe space was at all times. Steve did his usual warm-up, complimenting Elijah's notebook drawings when he noticed the boys sketching backstage, unaware of what those drawings actually represented. But nobody in that studio knew what was coming. Tanya had lost her apartment 2 years earlier, after her hours at a regional distribution warehouse were cut from full-time to 28 hours a week, just under the threshold for maintaining her health benefits, a scheduling shift the company implemented across its entire workforce. The same month her rent increased by $300. She fell behind by 1 month, then 2, and was served an eviction notice on a Tuesday in March. She applied for emergency rental assistance through the county. Denied, citing a backlog that had closed the application window 3 days before her filing, a window she hadn't even known existed until the denial letter informed her it had already closed. She applied for a second regional program, driving 40 minutes each way to submit paperwork in person after the online portal repeatedly failed to accept her documents. Denied because her income, even reduced, still exceeded the cutoff by $40 a month, a threshold that hadn't been adjusted in 6 years despite rising rents across the region. A detail a caseworker confirmed apologetically over the phone, without offering any path forward. A caseworker suggested a transitional shelter, but the waitlist ran 11 weeks long, and shelters in her area didn't guarantee keeping a mother and child together in the interim. A condition Tanya found impossible to accept, no matter how desperate their situation became. She looked into a 3rd county program specifically for working families facing eviction, only to learn it had been defunded the previous fiscal year and never formally announced as closed, meaning the caseworker who initially suggested it hadn't realized it no longer existed. Faced with that, Tanya made the decision that broke something in her she never fully explained to anyone. She moved into the car. She sold what furniture she could in the 2 weeks before the eviction took effect, storing the rest in a cousin's garage 2 counties over. An arrangement that cost $40 a month she could barely spare, but felt necessary to keep some anchor to a normal life she still believed. Somewhere underneath the daily grind of survival, they would eventually return to. What nobody at Elijah's school understood, not his teachers, not the front office staff who processed his attendance, was how carefully Tanya and Elijah had learned to hide it. She kept 2 changes of clothes on hangers in the car's back window so they'd stay pressed. She found a truck stop 40 minutes from Elijah's school that let them use the showers for $5, 3 mornings a week, timing their visits before sunrise so Elijah could still make it to first period looking like any other kid. She told her sister on the phone that they were staying with a friend for now. She told Elijah's teacher, when asked directly about a change of address form, that they were in transition, sorting out details. She told Elijah, nearly every single night, tucking a blanket around his shoulders in the cramped back seat, "This is temporary, baby. We're going to have a real home soon." She said it so many times over 731 nights that she'd nearly convinced herself it was still true, even as the timeline stretched far past anything either of them had expected. The daily cost of carrying that invisible burden showed up in small, specific ways. Tanya lost close to 20 pounds over those 2 years, skipping meals so Elijah's backpack always had food for lunch. She worked her reduced hours at the warehouse and picked up a second job cleaning offices at night, sleeping in short stretches between shifts while parked outside the buildings she cleaned, engine running just long enough to keep them warm through Ohio winters before she had to cut it to conserve gas money. She kept a small notebook of her own, separate from Elijah's drawings, tracking exactly how many miles she could drive before needing gas, exactly how many dollars remained after each paycheck, exactly how many days until the next shower at the truck stop was affordable. Elijah, for his part, developed a habit of waking at the exact same time every morning without an alarm, a survival skill more than a routine, always alert to whether the car had been approached by anyone during the night. He'd started drawing the houses in his notebook about 8 months into living in the car, a habit his school counselor noticed, but interpreted incorrectly as simple architectural interest rather than the specific coping mechanism it actually was. Elijah had also learned, without ever being explicitly taught, to manage his own expectations around friendships at school, declining birthday party invitations he knew would require a home address for pickup, inventing reasons he wasn't allowed to have friends over, small deflections that kept his secret intact, but slowly, quietly, isolated him from the ordinary social fabric of middle school life. His teacher, noting his participation had dropped off somewhat over the 2 years, attributed it to typical adolescent withdrawal rather than anything more specific, since Elijah had become skilled at appearing simply shy rather than fundamentally displaced. One night, about 4 months before the Family Feud taping, Elijah had asked his mother from the back seat in the particular quiet voice kids use when they already suspect the answer, "Mama, are we ever going to have a house with a door that's just ours?" Tanya had to turn toward the window so he wouldn't see her cry, telling him yes, someday, without any real certainty behind the word. But nobody in that car that night knew that question would resurface, transformed, in front of a national television audience 4 months later. The specific reason Tanya applied for Family Feud was almost desperate optimism. A coworker mentioned that a friend of a friend had won enough on the show to cover a security deposit. And Tanya, with nothing left to lose, filled out the casting application on her phone during a break at her cleaning job. She didn't mention the car in the application, ashamed of how it might read, describing their situation only as going through a difficult financial stretch. The callback came 6 weeks later, and Elijah, when told, asked only whether he'd get to meet Steve Harvey in person, which Tanya took as a good sign that he still had room in him for excitement, despite everything. The taping moved through its early rounds with typical rhythm, the Castellanos family enthusiastic and quick on the buzzer, the Wards a little more reserved but clearly likable to the crowd. During a standard round, Steve asked the families a light-hearted survey question. Name something your family always does together, no matter what. It was designed for warm, simple answers: game nights, church on Sundays, Sunday dinners. Elijah, next in line to answer, said without hesitation, the way kids often answer honestly before they've had time to filter themselves, "We count the days. We're on day 731 of living in our car, so counting is kind of our family thing now." The studio fell completely silent. Steve, mid-motion reaching for the next card, stopped entirely, his hand still hovering over the podium. His smile disappeared all at once. He looked at Elijah, then at Tanya, whose face had gone pale, clearly not expecting her son to say it so plainly, so publicly, in front of 200 people and rolling cameras. Nobody in that audience moved. Even the crew, usually shifting equipment quietly during breaks, had gone still, several of them visibly stopping mid-task to stare at the stage. Steve set the cards down slowly on the podium. He walked over toward Elijah, crouching down to his eye level. "Say that again for me, son," he said quietly. Elijah, sensing now that something had shifted but not fully understanding why, repeated it. A little less confidently this time. 731 days. We keep count on a piece of paper taped inside the glove box. Steve nodded slowly, then stood back up and walked a few paces away, standing with his back to the audience for several long seconds, gathering himself before turning back around with visibly wet eyes. But Steve wasn't done. He turned to his stage manager and said the words that would end up quoted in every recap of the taping. "Cut the cameras. Actually, no. Leave them rolling." This has never happened in 45 years of this show, and I am not moving past it like it's just another round. A producer near the wings signaled urgently for a commercial break, and Steve waved him off entirely. "No network approval," he said. "This is me, Steve Harvey, and we are stopping the game right now." He walked over to Tanya, who was crying too hard at this point to speak, and knelt down in front of her. "Let me tell you something," Steve said, his voice rough. "Nobody helped me when I was at my lowest. I slept in my own car for 3 years, back in the 80s, before any of this. Before any of you knew who I was. I showered wherever I could find a sink, I ate whatever I could scrape together, and I promised God, I made a real promise, that if he ever got me out of that car, I would spend the rest of my life helping people who were still sitting where I used to sit." He looked directly at Tanya. "Ma'am, 38 years ago, I was you. I know exactly what 731 nights in a car does to a person's spirit. And I know exactly what it costs to keep telling your child it's temporary." Tanya broke down completely, and Elijah, seeing his mother cry in a way he'd rarely witnessed, reached for her hand. Steve wasn't finished. He pulled out his phone, right there on the stage, something no host does mid-taping, and dialed a number from memory. "I need a fully furnished 2-bedroom apartment secured for the Ward family, lease signed and move-in ready within the week," he said into the phone, loud enough for the front rows to hear every word. "And I want a case manager assigned today to make sure this never happens to them again. Not through a shelter waitlist, not through anything." Today, he hung up before waiting for a response, certain of the answer. He turned to face the cameras directly. "I want to talk to everyone watching at home," he said. "A 12-year-old boy just told 200 strangers something his own teachers didn't know, something his classmates didn't know, because his mother was working 2 jobs and doing everything humanly possible to keep that hidden so he could just be a kid at school. That's not a failure on her part. That's a failure of a system that let a working mother fall through every single crack it built." Dozens in the audience were crying openly now, and several crew members had stopped hiding their own tears. And then he did something no one expected, even his own producers. He announced that both families, the Wards and the Castellanos family, would split the full fast money prize regardless of the game's outcome. The Castellanos family's father crossed the stage immediately, without being asked, and embraced Tanya, telling her that his own family had once gone through something similar years earlier in a different city, and that he understood more than she might guess. 3 months after the taping, the Ward family moved into their new apartment, the yellow one with a small side yard that Elijah said reminded him of one of his notebook drawings, though he admitted with a laugh that it didn't have a treehouse yet. Tanya said the hardest adjustment wasn't logistical but psychological. She found herself checking the parking lot outside their new bedroom window some nights out of pure habit, unable to fully believe the stability was real until months had passed without incident. When the episode aired 6 weeks after taping, it crossed 260 million views across platforms within the first 10 days, and the hashtag Day731 trended worldwide for a full week, prompting several housing advocacy organizations to cite the specific income threshold gap that had disqualified Tanya from assistance as an example of policy failure needing legislative attention, with at least 2 state representatives referencing the case directly during committee discussions on updating outdated assistance thresholds. A year after the taping, Tanya had moved into a full-time position with benefits at a different company, one of Steve's foundation contacts having connected her directly with an employer committed to stable scheduling, ending the 28-hour threshold trap that had started the entire crisis in the first place. Today, the Day731 Foundation, named for the exact number Elijah gave on stage, has provided emergency housing bridge funding to over 1,100 families caught in the same threshold gap that nearly kept the Wards in their car indefinitely, and to date has distributed $22 million to prevent other families from falling into the same trap, with a dedicated rapid response fund specifically designed to intervene before a family's timeline stretches anywhere close to 731 days. Elijah still has the spiral notebook, its pages now filled with drawings of the actual yellow house instead of imagined ones, tucked into a drawer in his own bedroom for the first time in over 2 years. In a later interview, Steve said that number 731 was the most precise, devastating detail a child had ever handed him on live television. He wasn't trying to embarrass anybody, Steve said. He was just answering, honestly, the way kids do when they haven't learned yet that some truths are supposed to stay hidden. And I'm grateful every day that he didn't know that yet. He added that the number itself, so exact, so casually delivered, was what had undone him more than any tears could have, because it proved the boy had been counting every single one of those nights, fully aware, the entire time. Tanya still calls Steve's team every few months with updates, and Elijah recently mailed a drawing of the yellow house directly to Steve's office, which now sits framed on a shelf behind his desk. What Elijah's answer revealed to a stunned studio and to millions watching afterward wasn't really about homelessness in isolation. It was a reminder that the families quietly falling through the cracks of a system built on rigid thresholds and backlogged waitlists are so often working, trying, doing everything asked of them, and that sometimes it takes a child's honest, unguarded answer to make the rest of us finally see what had been sitting in plain sight all along. If this story about a boy who counted his days living in a car moved you, make sure to subscribe and hit that thumbs up button. Share this video with someone who needs to know that sometimes one act of compassion is enough to change everything. Do you know a family in a situation like this? Let us know in the comments. And don't forget to ring that notification bell for more moments that restore your faith in humanity.